Let's create a pivotal impact. Friends in the industry. So in today's episode, I'm really excited to bring back Rita Smith, owner of Road Warrior News and a true industry advocate, as part of our Buckle Up series. So during our conversation, we dive into a coaching process where Rita takes me through an incredible process on how to overcome worry, trouble, fear, and stress. So throughout the conversation, Rita coaches me through how we can identify what is our worst case scenario if this stressful thing actually happened and what I'm actually worried about and happened to come true, but how to accept this worst case scenario so that way we can calmly work our way through it to rebuild after it occurs. So I believe today's episode is a must listen, as we all have worries and fears that we combat at one point or another, and we need to understand how to break through these and not allow them to hold us back. So I highly recommend you letting us know in the comment sections what fear or worry were you able to overcome by completing these steps. You can also learn more about Rita by visiting roadwarriornews.com or email her directly at roadwarriornews@rogers.com. So if this is the first time you've ever checked out a Truck Focus podcast, I welcome you to our community. And to all of our dedicated listeners, I just want to continue to say thank you so much for your investment of time. Make sure that you like this episode and share it out, as there's so much value in today, and subscribe to the channel you're listening on. As always, I'm super excited for the impact this conversation is going to have. Let's get to it. Rita, super excited for today as, you actually get to coach me through some stuff. And I think our conversation is just super exciting. And I'm grateful that you came back to the Truck Focus podcast. I think that speaks volumes just to the effort that we put into our first conversation and where things are going. So welcome back, Rita.
Thanks, Josh. I feel very welcome. Thank you for making me feel so welcome. And thank you for being so open to coaching. There's going to be a little bit of coaching going on in our stress management workshop today. And I'm happy to be able to come back and do this. And I think it's going to be a step up from our intro podcast where people just got to meet me. So now we'll actually get to do something useful. I'm glad about that.
Me too. Yeah, no, and I'm super grateful as well. I appreciate any time someone can be a mentor to me and invest into me. I feel almost instantly once we started connecting, I'm like, oh, you actually care. Okay, this is different. And yeah, I'm grateful. So
I have a super soft spot in my heart for young people who are go-getters in business. I had a student in the class once. He was 19 years old. He paid his own way for the Dale Carnegie course back when I was an instructor. I'm not currently, but I consider my Dale Carnegie instructing years to be one of the most important periods of my life. A young man by the name of Chad. He was 19 and in a classroom where everybody there was either an engineer from General Motors or was working for Ontario Power Generating at the nuclear power plant in Darlington, much older, much more experienced people, every single one of whom was there because their company paid for them to be there, right? Their company whipped out the corporate credit card or had an invoicing system. They paid $2,000 for a manager in their program or an employee in their company to come and take the program. This young kid, 19 years old, tall and skinny as a rake, he walked in his blue jeans and his work clothes, and he flipped open his business checkbook. I know what a business checkbook looks like because I have the exact same thing. Opened his own personal business checkbook. And he said to me, "How much is this class?" I said, $1965, I think was the price at the time, $1,965. And he pulled a pen out from behind his ear and he wrote the check. He ripped it out of the corporate checkbook and he handed it to me. And I remember taking that check out of his hands thinking, he is going to get 10 times more out of this class than any of the people that are here because their company wants them to be here, because he himself wants to be here. And he did. And he was just amazing. And he remains an inspiration to me to this day. It's just one example of, I really have a soft spot for young people in business, people like you, your age, a little older, a little younger, getting out there and taking the risks, taking the chances, giving up the foregone paycheck every second Thursday being deposited into your account. I think Canadians really should appreciate the risk takers. And you are a risk taker. So I thank you for that. We're grateful for that. Being a risk taker can be stressful, though. There's risk that comes along with all that glowing story about my 19-year-old businessman. He will live through stresses that almost no one else ever does. He'll learn things that almost no one else ever does. And that's why entrepreneurs are so important to our society. So yeah, just by way of segueing into what we're going to do here today, I do have a soft spot for people like you, for young people like you who are taking the risks and investing the time and their own money, their own capital. I hope that some of your listeners can relate to where you come from and where you're going and where you want to help them go.
Yes.
I hope that they'll find all of this useful today.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'll just touch on that too, because I was about 19 when I first was introduced to a different way of thinking. And shout out to Sean Juchek, who he's been super influential in my life, literally since 19, 20 years old, when at the time, one of my best friends and I, we had our trucking company. And he's like, I can tell you're different. He's like, but I think I can really help transform how you think. And I think that's why we had an instant connection too, is I can always tell when someone's had training in the space of how we think, because we speak differently. We catch ourselves mid complaint and say, actually, I'm going to shift. And yeah, that's been a huge part of my journey. And yeah, to our listeners, that's something where I think they're grateful for, is you have to be vulnerable to be optimistic in a tough time. You have to be vulnerable to actually tell the truth, not slander, that kind of thing. And I think it's exciting just, yeah, where we're going to head today, because I think the topic itself and how you're going to help me, it really is going to help a lot of people, because I think in some way or shape or form, we all do feel basically what we're going to talk about. And yeah, I don't want to give too much away. I don't want to steal the floor from you, but I appreciate you sharing that backstory too, because I really resonate with that. And I have a couple close friends, same thing, where like, okay, I can tell you've invested some energy in money. I think money creates a different type of accountability when it comes out of your own pocket. So
Yeah, when
yeah,
you're writing your own corporate check at 19 years old in a classroom full of engineers. Yep.
yes,
Yep,
absolutely.
for
Yeah.
sure. I should look him up and see what he's doing these days. So we had a little bit of a talk before we settled on the topic for today. And I'll mention in the intro here, a lot of people connect Dale Carnegie and his work and Dale Carnegie training to being more outgoing, being more personable. The classic title of a book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, right? How to invent a whole category of how-to books, right? Like he invented everything. But he did some really early work a century before anybody else was thinking about stress, a century before anybody else was, let's say 90 years before anybody was thinking about worry, and the sort of the anxiety that is rife, certainly since COVID, but even before all the changes in our culture that have made life more challenging, have made Dale Carnegie's work in the topic of worry and stress only more helpful and useful, right? He knew that being stressed and being worried impacted your performance. It impacted the performance of people who are being measured in their work, like salespeople, or truckers, people who need to build relationships in their work, more like managers and human resources. He knew that you could not be your best self and do your best job and turn in your best performance if you were worried. So if you wanted to succeed in business, one of the things you needed to do was get a hold of worry. Josh, as you and I discussed previously, what we're going to talk about today is one technique among many, that Carnegie put forward to help just average everyday people, business people, working people who want to get a result, to manage their worry. Okay. In one of the workshops that I delivered this program many years ago, there was a high school student who I knew through family. I knew her parents and her aunts and uncles, and so she came to a workshop with her aunts. Right, it was very sweet. She sat about halfway through the workshop with all adult people. She was by far the youngest person in the room. And about halfway through this process, she had an epiphany where it occurred to her. Well, I'll just tell you what she said. All of a sudden, she shouted out in the middle of a session, a working session. She said, "I just realized I spend half of my time worrying that I don't spend enough time studying." She said, and she was 15 years old. "If I spent half of the time I spend worrying, studying, I wouldn't have anything to worry about." And I said, "Oh my God, Fazila, you in this room, you have summarized, what I was going to take 2 hours to teach, you just summarized it in a sentence. If you took half the time you spend worrying and instead spent it studying, you would have nothing to worry about. So let's work on a technique today to help people free their minds, clear their minds of worry, so that they can take all that mental energy, all that focus, put it on activities that actually are rewarding, revenue generating activities, relationship building activities. Take your head out of the worry space, put it into a space where that energy is actually spent productively using a technique that is fairly painful when you use it. Josh, I have to warn you ahead of time, this isn't a comfortable technique. It ends hopefully with some level of comfort for you, but it is going to put you through a little bit of a challenging mental process, and we're going to share it verbally, right? And I just want your listeners to know that we discussed ahead of time that the topic you're going to use is one you're comfortable discussing publicly, because if it wasn't, it wouldn't work for this process. So I have your permission to probe a bit on these questions. I have you're open to coaching. I have your permission to coach, and I'm going to take you through a 4-step process that is based on one of Dale Carnegie's fundamental principles for overcoming worry. Okay, it's principle number 2: how to face trouble. And any place that anybody wishes to replace the word trouble with the word worry or the word stress, it's all the same thing. Okay, how to face trouble, how to face worry, how to face stress. So this is a 4-step process, and I'm going to ask you first, what is it that you spend time worrying about?
Good question.
Item you worry about.
Yeah, I've obviously given it a little bit of thought going prior, but I remember when you first asked the question, because that's what we needed to focus on. I'm like, oh goodness. And I think the number one thing that I would say I consistently worry about, you could call it like imposter syndrome, where I put a lot of effort into something and then it kind of falls flat on its face. And you kind of like, am I even supposed to be doing this? Am I even qualified enough to be speaking about this? Like, I think I fight that a lot, and I worry about that a lot, where I have to tell myself to basically shut up, because I'm like, stop, because otherwise, I feel defeated, where I'm like, oh, I put hours into this, and I don't care about the vanity likes and stuff like that, but I'm like, there was nothing. It fell flat on its face, or from what I can see. So I fight the, should I give up because I'm an imposter, or am I cool and I can keep going? Like, I fight that quite a bit.
That's interesting. Imposter syndrome and failure in the same sentence. Imposter syndrome and failure in the same sentence. I have watched in the last week, some parts of it twice, the Netflix series that's out called Inventing Anna. Have you seen it?
I've seen the clip. I haven't actually watched the episodes.
Watch the whole program from the beginning to the end. It was made for you. It was made for you.
Okay.
Inventing Anna. About a young woman. It's a factual story. It's based on fact about a young Russian woman, 26 years old, who landed in New York City and convinced everyone she was a wealthy German heiress. Came, this close to convincing a bank to invest $40 million in an idea of hers. Ended up getting coverage in, I think it was New Yorker magazine. She ended up being arrested. There was a court case. The New Yorker magazine covered the court case. Her impostoring, her life as an imposter German heiress, was laid bare for all to see. Okay. So if you are interested in imposter syndrome / failure on the big screen writ large, watch Inventing Anna, because that series seriously goes in depth exploring, really in depth exploring almost precisely what you just mentioned. Yeah. So there's your assignment number 1, is watch all of Inventing Anna from the beginning to the end. Okay. Some parts of it ended happy. Some parts of it did not end happy. As I said, this exercise is not all about making you feel great every step of the way through it, but hopefully by the end of it, you will. Okay. So it sounds to me, Josh, that what you're worried about isn't so much being called an imposter, but failing.
Yeah,
Is
that's
that
fair.
fair to
Yep.
say? Because if
Yep.
you were an imposter like this girl Anna, and you got away with it, and the bank lent you the $40 million, and you opened the big art gallery, you would have no stress, right?
Yes.
So you're not
Yes.
really stressed
True.
about having an imposter syndrome. You're stressed about taking a risk and failing.
Okay.
Does
Okay.
that sound closer to the truth?
Yeah. I'm making a note of that too. Yeah.
Here in the space that you're in, there are no imposters because every single human being doing this, podcasting, YouTubing, everybody doing this is making it up as they go along. There is no university degree in how to run a podcast that I've ever heard of. You tell me.
Absolutely. Yes. No, you're absolutely absolutely correct. Yes. Yeah. It's
So
been a lot
either
of trial and
everyone's an
error.
imposter or no one is.
Right. Right. Okay. No, that's a great point. That's actually a really good revelation or revelation. I appreciate that. Yes.
So you're newer than some people, but not a whole lot newer than even the most successful podcasters that there are.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So if you set out to do something, you bit off something larger than you could chew, and you failed at it utterly. Okay? That's the next step in this process. After we've identified your issue, which we're going to say is not imposter syndrome, but fear of failure. Welcome to humanity, Josh. Um, the first question to ask yourself is, what is the worst thing that could possibly happen? And I need you to out loud draw the picture for me. What's the word? You failed. You put everything out there. You presented yourself in a certain way to a certain group of people, and you fell right on your face. You were called an imposter publicly. You failed utterly. What's the worst that could happen?
Aside from probably a little embarrassment and or hurt feelings, I don't know. I don't know if there would be much worse than that aside from maybe loss of an employment. Well, I don't know if this answers the question, but I know where my mind goes. And I grew up really, really poor, like from the Canadian perspective. I grew up like I was in and out of foster care when I was a child and grew up single mom. She did the best she could, but there was myself and my sister. So I know part of the fear of failure, that's where my heart will instantly go. And I have to combat my way back is, oh, that's it. It's all over. And I don't know if that's the right answer to the question, but I could see my mind going to that. Okay, that is my worst case is everything crumbles now. My entire world goes up in shambles because this one project was a failure, or I stuttered on stage and they won't invite me back. Like I know that would be where my mind would go as an absolute worst case, even though in hindsight, that maybe isn't the situation, but I think that's probably the safest answer because I know that's where my brain goes is I have like this deep like feeling in my gut like, oh man, everything's over now. And yeah, I go right to that.
Stage, it's all done, right?
Yeah.
How long have you been working for money? How old were you when you started working for money?
14ish, 15 is when I first had a job, but I was a hustler as a younger guy, like not illegally, just always trying to, I think I was better at.
Since you were 12?
Sorry, say that again.
Let's say you've been earning money since you were 12?
Easily, yeah. Paper routes I was a dreamer. Like I remember my first dream of a business was picking up dog poop and because no one wanted to do it. And that was the number one complaint my friends had. So yeah. So.
And how old are you now?
Just about 35.
Just about, oh my God. So you have been
change.
earning money for 2/3 of your life, easily by measure. 66% of your life, you've been an income earner, one way or another. Okay. And if you stuttered on stage, all that could just on.
It's interesting how that's where your mind goes.
Okay. I don't think that you're visualizing a big enough failure. Stuttering on stage, I'm going to say, doesn't even qualify. I need you to visualize a way bigger failure, like your wife leaves you because you're bankrupt, that kind of.
Wow. Okay. I have never actually really thought that far. I don't think I've allowed myself to go that far in a situation. I think just knowing our family, like we're equal breadwinners, but I think that thought is I don't, well, again, I don't think of my wife leaving me, but I could see the stress on her, but also my sons, because my sons live very comfortably. And yeah, I think that would be pretty horrific. I think not being welcome in a place is also, to me, pretty horrific. Like not having a sense of being welcome in a home, not being welcome in a place of business or school, like being essentially rebuked. That's a for me as well.
So
And
the looking at what could happen from a business point of view and financial, if you fail, I don't know, you've got the XYZ campaign. You're launching it next month. You've been working on it for a year. The XYZ campaign, put everything you got in it. The XYZ campaign just blows up in your face. Not only doesn't earn you any money, but actually costs you money. Like you have to sell your house to pay off debtors or go to jail. The XYZ campaign is the worst idea you ever had, and all the energy you put into it not only was wasted, but actually cost you your security, right? What a bad idea the XYZ and that XYZ initiative was. In the life that you live, the people that you do business with, and the woman that you are married to, the sons that you have fathered, you see those people that you've chosen to be part of your life over the last 24 years. They're the kind of people who would stand by you in a circumstance like that, or they're the kind of people who would leave you in a circumstance like that.
you would ask me before I was married, I honestly think 99% of the people in my life would have been gone. I think it was very superficial relationship, very, what do I have to offer to them? And that's
Yeah.
why I was in their life. But thanks to my wife, she's really helped me kind of pull the weeds per se out of my own relationships, where I feel now I would be shocked if people did. That's why I would be deeply hurt if they did, because I feel like I'm a good judge of character and I'm very mindful of who I would call a friend. But that would be devastating for sure if that happened. But I think part of it though is reputation. And like myself, like if I had someone that turned into a Ponzi scheme person, I wouldn't associate with them. Just so if I felt I was that, if I was a scheme, so then I could see other people just saying, well, I want nothing to do with you. And that would really, really hurt. And I know like my wife, she's Asian, and like respect is a really big thing in this
Okay.
cultural thing. I'd honestly say more than Caucasian at times, where I think that would be devastating too. Like I think I could be like listed as, no, you're not welcome here and we don't want to associate with you, and that would be pretty devastating as well.
So it would be that's an interesting path you just went down there, because I asked if you thought that she would abandon you, and that your clients, the clientele that you've built up over all these years, would abandon you, and you in the first pass didn't think they would, but then I could see you working a little bit harder to think, what if they did? Okay.
Yeah.
What if they did? That would be really painful, eh?
Yeah. Well, that'd be
Really,
horrific. Yeah.
it'd be horrific. It'd be horrific. Okay. So let's stay horrific a little bit. Because the next step in this process is prepare to accept the worst. Okay. Prepare to accept the worst. So where I want you to go in your mind with this, where Dale Carnegie suggests you go in your mind with this, is imagine the day your clients have said, Josh, we don't want you back. Sorry, buddy, but we can't be associated with you. So as a matter of fact, we're not even paying for that session that you did. Okay. Your bank manager has said, Josh, we're bouncing your checks now. Like you're going to have to either cover this overdraft or we're closing the account. Okay. And your wife has said, honey, I'm sorry. I can't look you in the eye anymore. We're finished. I'm taking the boys and we're going home to my mother. Okay. And you are alone in the house you're about to lose in the business that just failed. Okay. So just pause for a second and go there in your mind. Like actually imagine what it would be like to feel like that on all those levels.
Man, you're making me cry.
Sorry, me cry for you, even.
Holy smokes. Yeah, that
Accept it. Don't push it away. Accept it.
would be bad.
Of course. Yeah, ugly, eh? accept the worst. You're there. It's happened.
Mm-hmm.
So now here's Carnegie's fourth step. Calmly proceed to improve upon the worst. You had to visualize the worst to actually get there in your mind. You're there. It's the worst. Now improve upon it. What are you going to do in that situation? It's happened. Now what?
I think the first thing you'd need to do is apologize, and just you'd have to own it. You have to own the fact that there's no quote unquote gun to the head on the decisions that were made. So that would be so hard. Holy smokes. It's interesting when you think about apology and the take me as I am type mentality. Like that's I think that's where I'd have to start. But then the rebuild, I wouldn't even know. Like I wouldn't know if it would be.
What would the words sound like in your apology? What would your apology sound like?
Probably use language like selfish, or I wouldn't say a word research. I don't know a different word than that. I wasn't maybe not even prepared, but I didn't think it through, or I did think it through and I ignored the consequences of the action. I think that would be a big piece of it. But I think selfish would be a big piece. Like the moment you get married and or the moment you become a parent, there's just a different type of responsibility where, yeah, if you're in that position, or if I am in that position, yeah, I would have to really face the fact that I ignored what I committed to, but also ignored, I think, who I loved. And I chased a different figure, if it was money, if it was attention or fame. And I don't think that wouldn't be the apology. I think that would be part of the process. But trying to build trust again after that, if they would even listen, but I don't think it's circumstance. I think like my wife, if she were to say that, or my sons would feel that, or the family would feel that, that conversation and apology would be very different than a bank.
Yeah.
Because a bank.
Right, the bank, you bring them more money. Your apology means nothing to a bank.
Correct.
Yeah. Money means nothing to a bank. So,
but I think you would need to build, or I would need to build the foundation of my family back before I even attempted to. But even that, the thought of like what hurt was the thought of basically you're ripping the stability away from your family. And that was the part that made me emotional. And then I think like I really felt like that was a worst case scenario, like watching my kids leave and selling a house that we built, that we love, and just knowing in reflection that because of my ignorance, really, and my selfishness, I destroyed memories and I took part of their life away, in per se. That's horrible. And that would be really difficult to.
This step in the process is dedicated to calmly preparing to improve upon the worst. Okay. So we've left behind the painful part now. You're still alive. You haven't committed suicide.
No, by any means. Yeah.
By the way, no one in any of my classes ever has, right? Like, nobody ever went through this process and said, wow, this is so bleak. I'm finished with everything. I'm going to end it all. Nobody's ever done that. This is the part of the process that I think helps remove some of your fear, helps remove the worry. Okay. Is the idea that the worst can happen. And it does. Like to some people, it does. Like I've seen it. The worst can happen. But then the survivors calmly prepare to improve upon the worst. Calmly prepare to improve upon the worst. That option is open to you. You have that option to calmly prepare to improve upon the worst. What happens with people who get stuck in a cycle of worry and stress, like the high school student in my worry seminar, they get stuck in the cycle of worrying. They don't know why. They never ask themselves, what's the worst that can happen? They don't go that far. They don't ask themselves, what's the worst that could happen? I'll fail a class. Okay. They just get stuck in a state of absolutely unproductive worry. And because it's unproductive, they're not visualizing what's the worst that could happen. They never get to the point where they could calmly proceed to improve upon the worst. So this is what I think is magical about Dale Carnegie's process. Ask yourself what's the worst that could possibly happen. Prepare to accept the worst. Accept it. You've accepted it. You're not fighting it anymore. You're not avoiding it. You're not having a beer so you could forget about it. You're not watching television for hours on end so you could forget about it. You're accepting the worst, not trying to deny it. And then the magical words, calmly proceed to improve upon the worst. Okay. So that's where you are right now. All options are open to you now.
Yeah.
You can do anything you want to calmly proceed to improve upon the worst. What would you do? What's going to be step one on improving upon the worst?
Part of it would be apologizing to family. And I think part of it would be doing what I do best. And it's honestly working. I think that would become my crutch for a little bit, would be to not even a thought of paying bills, but just building a foundation again would be, okay, what am I good at? Okay. And then you can start the rebuild process. And part of the, yes, when I say work, I don't mean necessarily just a job, but I would definitely, if it would be part of it could be a job, part of it could be a course. And I think just really just building on that momentum, showing my family, hey, look, I am rebuilding. And yeah, sure, there's going to be financial obligations that you're still going to have to pay, but you have to create revenue, obviously, to pay. So I think that would be a really safe place. And I've never really minded the 16, 18-hour days. I get tired and then I'll have like a burnout. I fight burnout sometimes, but I think I would really go into that process. And I think I would get to a place where I would be at moments before the disaster happened. I think it's just the time process at that point. But I think a lot of that energy and the reason behind it would be to show like my family, hey, look, like I'm not that decision and I'm not gonna, I think that's how I would overcome my worst case though. And I could do that calmly because I just know who I am.
So now that you know what you would do in that situation, now that you know, okay, if the worst happened, I have a plan to calmly improve upon the worst. Do you think in the days or weeks ahead that on the days where your brain clicks into gear, you're walking onto stage and you start stuttering, you might be able to shift your brain into the space where you say, what's the worst that can happen? I've already accepted the worst. Now I'm going to improve upon the worst.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Can you give me, I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but can you give me an example in your sort of ongoing life and professionally, your career as you work, where sometimes worry diminishes your performance? But if you were able to say, what's the worst that can happen? I'm going to accept the worst and improve upon the worst, you might actually perform better.
Yeah. Actually, when you said that, when you tied that together, I think that gave me some good clarity. But for me, I fight anxiety through because I sweat. I'm a forehead sweater.
Okay.
And that I've overcome it quite a bit. But that prohibited me from doing a lot of things because the moment I thought I was sweating was like an anxiety overload.
It took up space in your brain.
Yes, absolutely. So I literally have lost sleep the morning or the night before or the 2 nights before a presentation because that's what I thought about. I'm like, I know my material, I know the audience, but I'm gonna sweat, and then that would just domino effect and trip me up. But then to overcome that, I'm like, okay, if I think I'm gonna sweat, what can I do? And I'm mindful of clothing. Sometimes I'm gonna wear a hat, and I'll wear a hat until I don't feel like I'm anxious sweating anymore, and I take my hat off.
Okay.
But that has been honestly a huge crippler, or had been a huge crippler. I do a lot of public speaking now where I'm way more comfortable and I still sweat.
I really like that example. It's a really visual example. We could have some fun with that. If worrying about your forehead sweating actually keeps you up at night before you speak. Okay. That's a classic example of where worry diminishes your performance. Like absolutely classic. You're not as clear as you should be. You're not as comfortable as you should be. You're not gonna Your words won't come off the tip of your tongue as quickly as they might if you'd had a good night's sleep the night before. So let's just quick go through this process with the sweating thing. I like that. It's probably less emotionally painful too. So, what is the worst that could possibly happen if you started sweating on your forehead in front of a group of people? What's the worst that could happen?
Should I? That's funny. When I get asked that question, because I've been asked that question a lot, and it's like nothing.
What's the worst that could happen? Are they going to fire you?
Right? No, yeah, no, they're not. Like aside from being wet and
Okay.
embarrassed,
Okay.
I think that's kind of as far as it goes from other people's perspective. But from my own perspective, I don't know if it's because I was teased as a kid, like maybe, but I've always, yeah, to me, it's always been like you said, it takes up space in your brain. So then I lose sleep and then the words don't come off properly. And then it goes down that failure rabbit hole. So it could all tie up into the exact same worst
You've
case scenario.
always had a little pocket kerchief, or in your pocket a cotton handkerchief or a Kleenex, whichever you prefer. You always had that, and then you started sweating, and you just did that. While your back was turned, or whenever you're not ashamed to do it in front of other people. Um, would you get fired for that? Would your client say, "We don't want you back, you sweat"? Like, is that?
Never. That's what I mean, right? When you bring the light to it, it's like, yeah, that's a good point.
So when
For
we
me,
ask what's the worst that could possibly happen, so far I've heard you say you would be embarrassed. That's the worst that could possibly happen. Okay. I don't want to make fun. I'm not making
yes,
fun. I just want
yes.
to tell you what, when we finish this exercise together, I want to give you a couple examples of things I've heard over the years, that provide a good illustration for this. So far, okay, so the worst that could happen is you'd sweat and somebody in the audience would point out that you're sweating. And to be realistic, they're not going to fire you. They're not going to withhold your pay. They're not going to get on TripAdvisor or Yelp and say, "Don't hire Josh as a speaker. He sweats." Five
Yes.
stars on the sweaty speaker scale. Okay, so the worst that could happen is you'd be embarrassed. Okay, so the next, I seldom cry while I'm doing these workshops, but we're so up close here. So let's prepare to accept the worst. Okay, Josh, I want you to imagine in your mind you're sweating and you're embarrassed. Okay,
Yeah.
accept that. Accept the worst that could happen, Josh. Accept you're embarrassed.
Man.
Did you survive it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So the worst has happened. You sweated publicly. The worst has happened. Let's try to calmly improve upon the worst. How would you improve upon that situation?
And it's just so powerful. And not to take away, but once you ask that question, I'm like, how many things in life have I given up? Or I said, no, no, no. Because that was my initial, like, that's where my head instantly went. Like, I remember, like, I'm Christian by faith. And I remember I was asked to give my testimony on stage. And the reason I said, no, I'll sweat. I can't do that. And I'm like, I still regret that. And another thing I regret because of the thought of sweat was my 11. Well, he's 12 now, but he was 9 at the time. Went to a little concert thing. He got asked to go up on stage to dance, and they asked me, and I said no. And that was the same.
Oh,
Yeah,
the dancing dads, and you couldn't be one of them because
yeah. That's right.
you might sweat.
Yeah, that's the first thought that I had, and I'm like, I still like we talk about that still, and I still apologize because I regret that deeply. And but
Okay.
literally, that's all you do. Oh, that makes me so annoyed and so happy as you wipe it.
I don't want to make light of your worst, like that. You've missed some important things over this. I don't want to make light of that. Um, Trying to improve upon the worst. Okay, so you sweated and you were embarrassed. How do you get over being embarrassed and sweating? Besides declining to do something, which is a real loss, but if you sweated previously, just never mind the sweating. You were embarrassed. Something happened that embarrassed you in your lifetime. You survived it. How'd you survive it?
Makes me think it's so minimal and compared to some of the world's problems. Oh my goodness.
Truth, eh?
Yeah.
The truth. Josh, I'm embarrassed because I'm crying on a podcast. So I'm gonna put on my still photo while I run and get a Kleenex. You think about the magnitude of problems, being embarrassed, and let's say a nuclear war. Okay, you think
Mhm.
about that while I run and get a Kleenex. I'll be right back. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, I'm back. I have a
Welcome.
Kleenex.
Well,
Um.
oh,
Okay, so what did you think about the magnitude of the sweatiness in the nuclear war?
can't even be on the same scale. Like crazy.
So maybe you could let go of that, eh? Maybe you could
Yeah.
let go of the fear of embarrassment and just accept that you could be embarrassed, and the world would still turn. You'd still be breathing. You'd still have a family to go home to. So what you hit on is a couple of things at play here that are good for people to notice. First off, is when I get to this step in a workshop. Remember, normally when I would do this workshop, there we would have a room full of people. Let's say there were 40 people in the room or 30 people in the room, and at each table there would be 4, 5, or 6 people. Right? We try to make it even. So let's say there's 5 people at every table, and everybody would write down the problem they want to work on with, and they would have the whole room full of people to work their table full to work with it, and they would share with each other verbally. They'd go around the table. What's the worst thing that could happen? Like, what's the situation that you want to talk about? What's the worst thing that could happen? And so 5 people would describe it, and then we would, after everybody had a sense of it, we'd say prepare to accept the worst, and everybody would accept the worst, and then try, and they would say out loud to each other what it would look like when they accept the worst. I'm on stage and I'm sweating the worst, right? And then they would give each other tips. It works as a group. They'd be giving each other tips on how you could improve upon the worst. Where you could wear a headband like David Lee Roth, or you could have always have a trademark Canadian tooth that you're always wearing, or always make a big deal out of having a handkerchief ready, or wear a blue COVID mask around your forehead, or whatever. Um, some way that you would deal with it, and always at that last part of the conversation in a whole room full of people, I could stand at the front of the room and listen to laughter. Laughter. It would be like this huge bubble of mirth would just like build and then explode in the room, and everybody would be laughing. It would be like you were at a stand-up comedy club, and all of a sudden the person on stage said something so funny that everybody laughed all together at the same time. And what I realized I was hearing after having run the workshop many times was the pressure valve, the relief of pressure. Everybody felt so pressured by their individual thing that was taking up space in their minds, causing them stress and worry. And once they were able to let go of it and share it with other people and look at ways to improve upon the worst, they felt so much lighter and so much freer and so much better. A huge part of it was the back and forth with other people. You can do this exercise on your own with a pen on paper, the 4 steps. What's the problem? What's the worst that could happen? Accept the worst and calmly prepare to improve upon the worst. You can go through those steps alone in your mind, but going through them with another person is quite magical, right? That they will give you ideas that you didn't have yourself, and you will have ideas for them that they didn't have. So when we would do this all together as a room full of people, all of a sudden at a certain point in the process, when I would say, here's the last step, and we'd do this, I'd hear laughing, laughing, and laughing. It was wonderful to hear, actually. It was really magical to hear people helping other people solve their problems together in a very friendly and supportive way. It was really wonderful. Um, I one night I asked every table to kind of give a summary of what they heard at their table. I do that most of the time. A summary of what they heard at their table. And the answers were uniform throughout this entire um, conference room of people. There were two kinds of problems that everybody resolved, right? Okay. The worst that could happen in every case, the worst that could happen was that they would be fired from their job, and almost universally, the the result was they would get fired to another job, or they'd get hired to another job. What would happen if you got fired from your job? Well, I'd have to go get another job. So the worst that could happen is you'd lose your job, and then you're proceeding to improve on the worst. Is you would go find more employment. You've been earning money since you were 12. Do you like have you forgotten how to earn money? No, I know. Okay, so you would go get another job. So 2/3 of the people in the room would say that the worst that could happen is that they would lose their jobs. Okay. The next worst thing that could happen would be that they would die. They're worried about dying. And so when you talk to the people who are worried about dying, you'd say, well, how are you going to improve on that? Well, I guess I'd get ready to die, right? Like, I guess I'd get my affairs in order and make my life right with God and make sure I said goodbye to everybody that I loved. And, then that, everybody dies, right? Everybody on planet Earth, everybody, as Woody Allen would say, I want to be famous for being the first person who lives forever. That hasn't happened yet, right? So the two biggest things that Canadians were worrying about was losing their jobs and dying. And if they lost their jobs, they would go get another one. And if they died, well, then really they'd have no, it would be over. It would be over, right? So it sort of all came down to the same, yeah, what am I worried about anyway? Um, if I took the time I spent worried about my homework and did my homework, I'd have nothing to worry about, right? If I took the time I'm not sleeping worrying because I'm going to sweat on stage and find a solution for sweating on stage, then I would actually get a good night's sleep, you know. So the whole vicious circle of worrying about something so bad that you make the situation work, you stop it. You just stop it in its tracks. You stop it. And Dale Carnegie said, like, very clearly, am I telling you not to worry, not to have concern? No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying address what is really bothering you and calmly proceed to improve upon the worst. If you get stuck at the part in the process, like your wheels spinning on snow and ice, you get stuck at the part of the process where all you do is worry and you do nothing else, you're doomed. But if you move on, you accept it, just accept it. Stop trying to fight it, accept it, and then figure out how you're going to deal with it. What happens is a release of energy. It's a giant release of intellectual and emotional energy that you can now focus on the problem. I bet if I asked you to write me a list of a dozen potential solutions to sweating on stage, you could do it. Like you'd be thinking of it now. Um, so I would encourage you to actually do that. Like write down, and to any of your listeners, write down what the potential solutions are and go through the list one at a time. Check them all off. And if those don't work, we'll talk to other people and get their suggestions, right? So you won't ever run out of ideas. Um, a story that really touched my heart, that really made me feel, wow, what am I worried about? Like, what am I worried about? Was some years ago, a women's group asked me if I would come and give the workshop to their group, which I did. They lived in an apartment building in North York, Ontario, and they just got together once a month to talk about local politics and things like that. They thought it would be fun to have me come and run a workshop, so I did at the library. We were at the library. And one of the ladies in the group ran a little newspaper, a little like tabloid folded over newspaper. She prints off once a week and she put them in the lobbies of all the apartment buildings in North York that she could get to. And advertisers bought little ads. And this was her enterprise in her retirement years, right? We all put ads in it. All the political officers put ads in it. And I did not know until I met her in person that she rode a scooter. No, she didn't ride a scooter. She had diabetes and she had um, a very serious problem with one of her legs. Okay? She still had it, but there was a risk that in the future she was not going to have it. And one of the things that she talked about challenged her that really upset her, hurt her ego, was that politicians wouldn't answer her questions. They didn't take her seriously because her newspaper was small. they didn't give her the same respect they gave the star of the Globe and Mail, and she had limited capacity to pin them down and demand answers from them, as the reporters who were in the scrums at City Hall or Queen's Park had. And so while we're going through the process of what's the worst that can happen, she decided to deal with the worst that could happen, and she's going to have her leg amputated, her foot from the knee down amputated. It was a way bigger problem than anybody else there had, right? We were all worried about sweating on stage or being embarrassed or minor ego related things. And she said, "Yeah, I might have to have my foot amputated." And I wondered in my mind, oh wow, is she going to be able to talk about this at the table, and like, is she going to come up with a solution to having her foot amputated? And it seemed to me really bleak, really one of the more significant problems that I'd ever heard anybody bring up. And we got around the table, and this is what she came up with. She said to me, "Well, right now I have a cane and a walker, because my foot is in bad shape. But if I have to have my foot amputated because of my diabetes, I'll get a scooter." And she said, "In my mind, I like to visualize me at Queen's Park chasing the politicians down the hallway. If they won't answer my questions, I would be like a motorcycle mama on my scooter, chasing the politicians and making them answer my questions, and I could keep up with them because I had a scooter." And I looked at her, I said, "That is the most amazing attitude toward possibly losing a foot that I could even imagine a human being having," right? Like, everybody else's problems, you have no problem. And if you could adopt her attitude toward losing a foot, might mean that you could get a scooter. So you'd be a motorcycle mama running down the politicians and the hallways at Queen's Park to get answers to your questions. Like that was the word, like that was her solution to the problem. So I've kind of always kept her in my mind as the comparator to what other people's problems are. It's not the worst. She didn't have the worst. She didn't have the easiest. Other people will have more. People have lost children. People have lost family members and parents. I don't want to negate any of that. I don't want to negate any of that. Those are huge, serious, significant things that people have to deal with. That's the bad news about this process. But the good news is that the same process still works, right? The same process. So what is the worst that can happen? It could be awful. It could be awful. You still have to accept it, right? You still live here on planet Earth. You still have to accept it. You can't spend the rest of your life fighting against it. And then once you have accepted it, given time, you calmly prepare to improve upon the worst. Okay. So this process can be used for very minor problems. It can, that really, like, just stop talking about doing your homework and do your homework. To really major things like losing a part of your body or losing a person that you love. I think what Dale Carnegie was getting at is every human being on this planet, all 8 billion of us, have problems that have to be solved. Nobody's doing any better by just fretting about their problems, but those that are calmly proceeding to improve upon the worst in that attitude, those that get into that mindset and that attitude are going to be okay. They're going to be okay because they can accept it. Because they can accept it, and they're going to look for a way to improve upon it. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, very powerful. A lot of clarity too. I really appreciate that. And oh, man, that's emotional. That's a very powerful tool. And so I keep writing down words as you're speaking. And I think breakthrough is a key word. When you're breaking through that barrier that's held you back for so long, or your worst case is something that you're about to face, but you can break through it. I think, yeah, instead of just sitting there and essentially dying from stress and worry because that's where you stopped and that's the bubble that you live, like that practice will help people live. And I think that practice would help people be able to say, hey, this is what I'm grateful for, because you actually have clarity in what you're up against instead of fighting it and just living with inner turmoil the whole time. Wow.
I think the whole idea that there's like a shapeless, nameless, foggy anxiety that could suddenly make your life worse. It's huge over the last couple of years, right? It's like dominating our life. Oh my God, everybody could get COVID every day. We could all die, we could all die every day. People are getting used to that level of anxiety where if you woke up one day and it was 2012, and the biggest thing you had to worry about was, I can't remember if it's the Winter Olympics this year or the Summer Olympics this year. I've forgotten. That was the biggest thing we had to worry about in 2012. We would be so relaxed we wouldn't even remember what it felt like to be that relaxed. Like everybody these days, everybody I talk to has got some kind of unnamed fear bothering them, holding them back. It could be COVID. It could be losing your job over COVID. It could be the fact that family members don't want to talk to you because you don't want to get the COVID shot. It could be the family members, don't want to talk to you because you got the COVID shot. There's just something to be worried about all day, every day anymore. And I think what Carnegie figured out, decades and decades and decades ago was put it right on the table, like put it right here. Face it, okay? Face it. Deal with it. Accept it, and then for God's sake, move on, right? I think that is something that's a skill set, one of many, many skill sets, tools, and techniques that he urged people to use. You know what? I'll wrap this up because we could go on all day. And I don't want the biggest concern, your stress, to be that I talk too much and your listeners can't take it. But I spoke to a man yesterday. He's a truck driver. He lives in my community. He was one of the very first people that I spoke to when I was thinking about, had already put in the offer to purchase Taxi News, and I was thinking of expanding it to more professional driver categories and including truck driving, right? So the first thing I did was go talk to this man who is my friend, who is a truck driver. And I said, what do you think about this? And what do you think about this as an initiative that I might get involved in? And I have a lot of time for him. I really trust his opinions, and I think he really knows what's happening in the real world. So I'm talking to him yesterday, and his wife is in the background. They're kind of calling out. She's calling out answers to things that he's saying. They're a hoot. They're just a hoot. I love them both. And I said, did you see this thing that was on Facebook? And he said, no, I'm not allowed to go on Facebook anymore. I lose my temper. He said, I get so angry, I can't deal with it. And I said, oh, well, how do I know that you know of things that are on Facebook? He says, oh, my wife will tell me about them. If she sees them, she thinks I need to know, she will tell me. And I said, so you yourself don't go on Facebook because it's too upsetting. And he said, Rita, I lose my temper too easily. And I didn't know, here's the thing I didn't know. He said, I've had some head injuries. I don't have complete control of my temper. And sometimes surprising things set me off. And I know it's really uncomfortable for the people around me. When I lose my temper, I see that, he said. So there are some things that make me lose my temper. I realize I just cannot be around those things. It's too upsetting to my family. And I thought, wow, that's really smart coping technique. I did not realize he had more than one concussion that apparently affects his ability to regulate his own emotions. But he's smart enough to see that, right? And he relies on people that he trusts to, you don't want to see this, you would find it too upsetting, right? So he believes his wife, and that's what he's going with. So we got chatting about tools and techniques. I said, there are tools and techniques that you can learn. In one really contentious period of my political career, I was reading Zen Buddhist books like every day, and Pema Chodron, when things fall apart. I was reading and learning some of the Buddhist techniques for regulating your mental state and your emotional state. There are the Christian tracks are great for helping you to deal with negative emotions, right? Dale Carnegie he numbers them. He has so many of them. He numbers them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, principle number 17, he numbers them. There are tools and techniques that people can use. I always go to Carnegie first because I'm most familiar with that. But I am very familiar with the idea that he didn't invent most of what's in his books. He codified what successful people were doing anyway, right? How are people managing stress? Well, they do this, and then he tells you how to do it. So if you're living in a world that is full of stress, nameless and void, right? You don't even, it's just formless. You don't even know why you're so upset. You're just upset all the time. Pick up some tools and techniques. Pick up a book by Dale Carnegie. Pick up How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. Pick up any of Pema Chodron's books. There are a number of really good resources out there that can help you name your stress and deal with it Anything is better than being constantly worried all the time about a nameless problem that can't be dealt with because it can't be faced. That's what Carnegie is saying. Face it, name it, look at it, imagine the worst, and calmly proceed to improve upon the worst. I think people would have a lot better night's sleep if they just promised to themselves they would do that.
Yes. Yes, completely agree. And we're very aligned. And I like I said at the very beginning, I appreciate it was basically an instant mentorship because I still fall victim to getting out of my own head or my inability at the time to get out of my own head. And I know I've been up for 48 hours straight because of stress and worry. And you get this weird phobia to go to sleep because you know you're not going to sleep until you actually follow through on a process and being mindful of what you listen to, what you watch. Like I'm the same way as your gentleman friend there, where I'm like, I gotta stay off Facebook right now because it's just too much. And I think, yeah, social media really adds to our fear at times, adds to our joy at times. But yeah, I think I forget the exact wording of it, but comparison kills all joy. I think that's really tough too, where it's just like, oh, I thought I was good enough until, or I thought this was a great until, and it's like, no, stop comparing. But yeah, there's a lot of value. Even just I'm reflecting as you're talking, I'm like, man, how many things have I given up because of this? Like minute thing that just happens to be my DNA. I just happen to sweat, and it's like, but I agree. And I really think that our listeners can agree because we're all dealing with various challenges, transportation, logistics, but as people. And I think, yeah, right now, today's day and age, there's like information overload and there's negative information overload and what's truth and what's not truth. But being able to actually follow accurate, achievable steps to process, okay, that's my worst case. Let's calmly get through it. I think that's crucial advice, which I'm really grateful that you shared. And I also appreciate your stories too, because I think stories, because it's not necessarily a picture when you're just listening, but you're creating a picture in people's minds of, like I mentioned before, breakthrough, what is possible. And oh, someone's been here before and they actually gave me a roadmap how to get through it. Okay, that's really cool. Instead of just doom and gloom and that's it, it's over. So yeah, I do really appreciate that. And even for myself, I'm like, oh, that was really powerful. And I don't typically get that emotional. So yeah, thank you.
Let me know if you adopt this technique. Some of the ideas. Ask your kids to help you. Ask your kids for their advice. What should dad do if he sweats on stage? Like, and see what they have to offer you. Try some of them and let us know back how it goes.
Yes.
And the technique, never minding just the sweating. The technique. Ask yourself, what's the worst that can happen? Accept it, and then calmly proceed to improve upon the worst. Some other situations where you use Carnegie's technique. There, I'd love to hear back on how that goes for you.
Agreed. Yeah, Rita, honestly, thank you so much. And just, I can't say enough. I've told countless people since we first connected a while ago, but not too long ago, is I'm like, you got to talk to Rita. You got to listen to what she has to say. And it's just really nice that you're very consistent with caring. And I think that's a superpower that our world really needs. And it needs to be showcased more. So I really am grateful. And I just really value from a Road Warriors new perspective, but also from our conversations perspective, I really value who you are and just the impact that you're having on my life. And obviously to our listeners too, it's just really grateful. And yeah, I'm excited to hear the feedback as well, just to see what.
I'm so happy. I'm so happy for you. And that is just one of the many stress management techniques in how to stop worrying and start living. Which I like to tell people that's the book that saw me through cancer. Um, uh, it costs on Amazon less than the price of a beer in a bar. So if you're thinking I have a lot to worry about, I'm going to go drink a beer in a bar. Just go on Amazon and order How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. It costs less, and you'll get infinitely more value from it.
Completely agree. Yeah, it's my next book to read because I'm reading Hero on a Mission right now. And then that was when you told me the first time, so I bought it. So that'll be my next read. So
love it. You'll have to give us a little your review of it next time we.
Yes, absolutely. But yeah, thank you so much again, Rita. I really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to more too, because I think, again, this direction is needed, like to the deepest desire. So yeah, I'm excited to have you back on again, as long as you'll continue to say yes. And
For sure.
Awesome.
We're gonna wrap. Do you want me to stay on for a minute to talk to you afterward?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I'll let you wrap and then I'll still be here if you need to do some logistics.
Sounds good. But yeah, thank you again, Rita. I really do appreciate it. And of course, everything that we talked about, anything that could be referenced to a link, I'll include in the show notes. But yeah, just really appreciate this journey for myself today. And I know, like, I can just picture myself operating a commercial vehicle, gotten time to think, being like, man, I got to process this. Okay, well, you just gave us some really good action steps to do that, which I really value. So thank you so much again for today. This was awesome. Rita, I just want to say thank you again so much for taking the time to join the podcast today, but also for all the value information that you shared. So understanding how to identify our worst case scenario if the thing we're worried about actually happens, accepting them, and then being able to calmly work through them is an essential for us to overcome these stresses, but also to live a fulfilling life. So I highly recommend that you learn more about Rita by visiting roadwarriornews.com, or you can email her directly, roadwarriornews@rogers.com. Rita, thank you so much again just for your continued mentorship and leadership in this space. So before we end, I really encourage you to think about what stress you're able to now overcome because of Rita's coaching today. I encourage you to think about, okay, what was my worst case scenario? How did I accept it? And how could I work through it? So that way, ultimately, it's no longer the change per se, and you had a breakthrough. Let us know in the comments below or send us an email because we're really interested to see just again on the impact that we're able to create through these types of conversations. So the Buckle Up series, it's all about that. It's all about helping people overcome just different challenges in life. Part of it's through just journeys that Rita's had, that I've had, but a lot of it is using the mentality and the coaching that Dale Carnegie brings to the table, which I'm super excited about as I learn more about it as well. So again, thank you so much for taking the time today. And as always, let's create a pivotal impact. Bye.